On a crisp autumn afternoon, a historic stone bridge became the stage for a confrontation that would shatter a school's social order. A racist bully fueled by a sense of untouchable privilege set a trap for a quiet, unsuspecting student. But in a shocking twist of fate, she grabbed the wrong girl. What happened next wasn't just a fight, it was a reckoning. The viral video was only the beginning. The story that unfolded would involve powerful families, a high-stakes legal battle, and a brand of karma so severe it would dismantle an empire of hate, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a fist, but the quiet, unshakable strength of someone who refuses to be a victim. Northgate High was a world unto itself, a sprawling brick-and-glass institution bisected by a clear, unspoken line. On one side were the children of the old money and the newly rich from the gated communities of Whisperwind Bluffs. On the other was everyone else. The undisputed queen of the Whisperwind Bluffs clique was Blakely Covington. Blakely wasn't just popular, she was a force of nature, a tempest of designer clothes, sharp-tongued insults, and inherited arrogance. With blonde hair so perfect it looked manufactured and eyes the color of a winter sky, she moved through the halls with the predatory grace of a shark. Her father, Robert Covington, was a senior partner at the most powerful law firm in the state, a man who believed rules were for the people who couldn't afford to break them. This philosophy he had passed down to his daughter, like a family heirloom. Blakely's power was absolute, maintained by a court of two loyal, if terrified, lieutenants, Heather and Jessica. They orbited her, laughing at her cruelest jokes and amplifying her every whim. And for the past several weeks, Blakely's whim had been to torment Simone Jones. Simone was an easy target. She was a scholarship student, a quiet girl with a sketchbook that was her constant companion and eyes that seemed to hold a universe of thoughtful daydreams. She was new to Northgate, having moved to town with her grandmother after her parents passed away a few years prior. She was also black, a fact that in Blakely's twisted worldview made her an object of supreme scorn. The bullying was a campaign of 1,000 cuts. A lost textbook here, a jokingly tripped foot there. Whispers that followed Simone down the hallway loud enough for her to hear, "Why is she in AP art? Does she even know who Monet is?" Blakely's favorite tactic was to corner Simone in the cafeteria line and critique her lunch, her clothes, her hair, her very existence at Northgate with a voice dripping in condescending sweetness. Simone endured it with a pained, stoic silence. She never retaliated, never told a teacher. She just absorbed the blows, her shoulders stooping a little lower each day. She knew the power the Covington name held. Complaining would be like a mouse reporting a cat to a council of lions. All she wanted was to graduate and escape. Unseen by Blakely's clique, another student watched this cruel theater play out. Her name was Taylor Williams. Taylor was in many ways an enigma at Northgate. She was also black, but she carried herself with a stillness and confidence that made her unapproachable to bullies. She wasn't part of any specific clique. She was academically brilliant, particularly in physics and math, yet she wasn't a nerd. She was athletically toned, but she wasn't on any of the school's main sports teams. Her eyes, a warm, intelligent brown, seemed to miss nothing. They saw the way Simone would flinch when Blakely's laughter echoed down the hall. They saw the smirks on Heather and Jessica's faces. They saw the cowardice of the students who looked away, pretending not to notice. Taylor's confidence wasn't inherited from wealth, but forged in discipline. Her father, David Williams, was a retired Army Master Sergeant who now ran a successful logistics consultancy. Her mother, Dr. Lena Williams, was a tenured sociology professor at the State University. Their home was one of structure, intellectual curiosity, and quiet strength. From her father, Taylor had learned discipline in situational awareness. From her mother, she had learned to analyze the social structures that allowed people like Blakely Covington to flourish. One evening, David had found Taylor practicing in their home gym, executing a series of fluid, precise movements. He had insisted she and her brother learn self-defense from a young age, not to seek out fights, but to end them. "Controlled, Taylor," he'd say, watching her practice a wrist lock. "It's not about hurting them. It's about controlling the situation. The moment you lose your temper, you lose." Taylor never sought to intervene directly in Blakely's harassment of Simone. Her mother had taught her about the complexities of intervention, about the risk of making things worse for the victim if the approach wasn't right. Instead, she offered Simone small kindnesses, a shared smile, a quiet, "Are you okay?" When no one was looking, picking up a book Simone had dropped before anyone else could kick it away. They weren't friends, not really, but there was a silent acknowledgement between them. The situation was destined to boil over. The catalyst was the upcoming Fall Arts Showcase. Simone, despite the constant harassment, had submitted a stunning charcoal portrait of her grandmother, a piece so full of life and emotion, it was the talk of the art department. It was selected for the prime exhibition spot. For Blakely, who had submitted a technically competent but soulless watercolor of a yacht, this was an unbearable insult. That a scholarship student, that girl could outshine her, was a crack in the very foundation of her world. The rage festered for days. She decided Simone needed to be taught a permanent lesson. The Old Mill Bridge after school on Friday, Blakely announced to Heather and Jessica by their lockers, "I'm going to make sure her hands are too shaky to ever hold a piece of charcoal again." The Old Mill Bridge was a local landmark, a graffiti-covered stone arch that crossed the creek at the edge of the town park. It was secluded, picturesque, and most importantly, far from the prying eyes of school faculty. Heather's eyes widened slightly. "Blakely, are you sure? What if you get caught? My father owns the police chief's golf buddy." Blakely sneered, shutting her locker with a clang that echoed her finality. "Who's going to catch me? I'll just tell her I want to talk. When she gets there, you two get your phones out. I want to film her crying." The plan was set. On Friday, Blakely would apologize to Simone in the hallway, asking to meet her on the bridge to clear the air. Simone, ever hopeful for peace, would surely agree. Then the ambush would be sprung. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp leaves. The sun, low in the sky, cast long, dramatic shadows across the park as Taylor Williams walked, her headphones playing a low-key instrumental track. Her usual route home took her through the park and across the Old Mill Bridge. It was her time to decompress, to let the noise of the school day fade and allow the elegant logic of her physics problems to settle in her mind. She was so engrossed in her thoughts, contemplating the paradox of Schrödinger's cat, that she almost didn't see the figures waiting at the center of the bridge. It was Blakely Covington, flanked by Heather and Jessica. They were positioned like vultures, their postures radiating a predatory energy that was impossible to miss. Taylor's internal alarm bells, honed by years of her father's training, began to chime. She slowed her pace, her eyes scanning the scene. Their focus was directed down the path she had just come from, the path leading back toward the school. They were waiting for someone. Taylor's mind instantly connected the dots: the arts showcase, Blakely's public humiliation, Simone's triumph. This was for Simone. A cold knot of anger tightened in Taylor's stomach. She considered turning back, finding another route, but a deeper instinct, a protective one, took over. She couldn't leave. What if Simone walked into this? Taylor pulled her phone from her pocket. She didn't want to call the police, not yet. That would escalate things in a way that could backfire on Simone. Instead, she opened her audio recorder app and slid the phone back into her jacket pocket, leaving it running. Then she pulled her hood up, obscuring her face, and continued walking, her pace steady and deliberate. Meanwhile, Blakely was growing impatient. "Where is she?" she hissed, checking her pristine rose gold watch. "It's been 10 minutes. That little charity case is probably too scared to show." "Maybe she's not coming," Jessica offered timidly. "Oh, she'll come," Blakely said, her voice like ice. "People like her are desperate for acceptance. She thinks I actually want to be her friend." Just then they saw a figure approaching, a lone student about the right height, wearing a dark hoodie. The low sun was behind the figure, creating a silhouette. In their eagerness, they saw what they wanted to see. "That's her," Blakely whispered, a cruel smile spreading across her face. "Get your phones ready. Showtime." Heather and Jessica fumbled for their devices, angling them to capture the confrontation. As Taylor reached the midpoint of the bridge, Blakely stepped forward, blocking her path. "Well, well, well, look what we have here. I'm so glad you could make it, Simone." Taylor stopped. She didn't say a word. She slowly raised her head, her calm brown eyes meeting Blakely's icy blue ones from beneath the shadow of her hood. For a split second, a flicker of confusion crossed Blakely's face. This wasn't the timid, frightened look she was expecting, but her rage and arrogance quickly bulldozed over the momentary doubt. She was committed. "Cat got your tongue," Blakely taunted, stepping closer. You think you're something special, don't you? Winning that little art award, you think you belong at Northgate? You don't. You're a diversity quota, a charity case my father's taxes are paying for. Taylor remained silent. Her heart was beating a steady, controlled rhythm. She could hear her father's voice in her head. Assess the threat. Control your breathing. Don't react, act. She noted the positions of Heather and Jessica, the phones held aloft. She saw the narrowness of the bridge, the stone parapets on either side. Blakely, infuriated by the silence, took it as defiance. You know I was going to go easy on you. Just a little chat, but you've got this arrogant look on your face. I think I need to teach you a lesson in humility. She lunged forward, her hands shooting out to grab the front of Taylor's hoodie. You are nothing, she snarled, her face inches from Taylor's. It was the moment everything changed. The instant Blakely's manicured fingers closed around her jacket, Taylor moved. It wasn't a panicked reaction. It was a practiced, fluid sequence of events. Step 1. Control the offending limb. Taylor's left hand came up and clamped down over Blakely's hand, not in a grip of strength, but with a specific thumb and finger placement on Blakely's pressure points. A jolt of sharp, surprising pain shot up Blakely's arm. Her eyes widened in shock. Step 2. Break the posture. Taylor simultaneously stepped forward, with her right foot positioning it just outside of Blakely's. With her right hand, she didn't push or punch. She simply cupped Blakely's elbow. Step 3. Use the aggressor's momentum. Blakely was still pulling, trying to yank Taylor forward. Taylor used that momentum, turning her hips in a smooth practice pivot. It was a classic Aikido technique, irimi nage, the entering throw. Time seemed to slow down. For Heather and Jessica, filming what they thought would be a beatdown, it was a blur of motion they couldn't comprehend. One moment Blakely was in control, grabbing the victim. The next she was airborne. Taylor didn't throw her hard. She guided her. Blakely's feet lifted off the ground as her own forward momentum was redirected in a graceful arc. She sailed past Taylor, her shriek of rage turning into one of pure, unadulterated shock. Taylor completed the motion by lowering her center of gravity, ensuring Blakely landed, not on the hard stone, but on the small patch of grass just off the bridge's entrance. Blakely landed with a heavy, undignified thump. The air was knocked out of her lungs. She lay there stunned, her perfect hair, disheveled mud staining her expensive white jacket. She wasn't seriously hurt, but her pride, her aura of invincibility, was shattered into a million pieces. Taylor stood up straight, calmly adjusting her hoodie. She turned, her expression unreadable, and looked at Heather and Jessica, who were frozen in place, their mouths agape, their phones still recording. She held their gaze for a long moment before finally speaking, her voice calm and clear, yet carrying an unmistakable weight. My name is Taylor Williams, she said, letting each word land with precision. You seem to have mistaken me for someone else. And you, she added, her gaze flicking to the gasping Blakely on the ground, should learn to keep your hands to yourself. Without another word, Taylor turned and continued her walk home, leaving the three of them in stunned, humiliated silence on the Old Mill Bridge. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves and the faint, panicked gasps of Blakely Covington, trying to understand how her perfectly ordered world had just been quite literally upended. The video cameras forgotten in their hands had captured it all. The thud of Blakely's body hitting the damp grass echoed in the sudden, profound silence on the Old Mill Bridge. For a few seconds, the only sounds were the gentle gurgle of the creek below and the rustle of autumn leaves in the wind. Heather and Jessica stood frozen, their phones held aloft like useless talismans, their faces slack with a mixture of shock and terror. Their minds simply couldn't process what they had just witnessed. The world had inverted its axis. Blakely pushed herself up onto her elbows, a series of gasping, wheezing breaths racking her body. Her perfect blonde hair was matted with leaves and dirt. A large, ugly smear of mud and grass stained the back of her pristine white jacket. But worse than the dirt was the look on her face, the utter confusion of a monarch who had just been effortlessly dethroned. What did you do?" she stammered, not at Taylor, who was already walking away, but at the empty space where she had been. It was Heather who finally broke the spell, lowering her phone with a trembling hand. "Oh my God, Blakely," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Are you okay? Blakely's head snapped towards her friends, her eyes blazing with a familiar desperate fury. "Am I okay?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with humiliation. "She threw me like I was garbage. Delete that video. Both of you, delete it right now." Heather fumbled with her phone, her fingers thick and clumsy with fear. But Jessica hesitated. Her eyes were glued to the screen in her hand, replaying the 10-second clip. She saw Blakely's aggressive lunge, the flash of dark fabric, and then the impossible, graceful arc as Blakely was tossed aside. She saw the calm, unreadable expression on Taylor Williams's face. For years, Jessica had lived in Blakely's shadow, a permanent state of low-grade terror dictating her actions. But in that video, Blakely looked weak. She looked pathetic. And in that moment of weakness, Jessica saw a glimmer of an opportunity, a path to self-preservation that didn't involve fealty to a fallen queen. Anonymity was its own form of power. By the time Blakely had stumbled back to her feet, brushing furiously at the stain on her jacket, the decision had been made in Jessica's mind. "Of course, Britt," she said, her voice smooth and reassuring as she pretended to delete the file. "It's gone." That evening, the digital world ignited. Two things happened almost simultaneously. First, an email from a newly created, untraceable address landed in the inbox of Ben Carter, the ambitious editor of the Northgate High Sentinel. The email contained a single attachment, the unedited video file, and no message. Second, a heavily edited version of the same video, cutting out the initial mistaken identity to make Blakely's aggression look completely unprovoked, was uploaded to a popular video-sharing platform from a burner account. The title was simple and devastating: Northgate Queen Bee Gets Schooled on Old Mill Bridge. At first, it was a spark shared between a few dozen students in a group chat. Then it became a blaze. It was airdropped in the library, texted under desks in study hall, and reposted across every social media platform. By 9 p.m., our Northgate Bridge was trending in their local area. The video was a perfect storm of high school schadenfreude, the beautiful, wealthy, and cruel bully, receiving a swift, shocking, and utterly elegant comeuppance. Taylor Williams was at her desk deep in the abstract beauty of a complex physics equation when her phone began to vibrate uncontrollably. It was a cascade of notifications, texts from numbers she didn't even recognize. She ignored them until a message from Kevin, a quiet boy from her calculus class, popped up. "Kevin, dude, is this you?" Attached was the video. Taylor pressed play, her expression remaining neutral as she watched the scene unfold from a third-person perspective. She saw Blakely's snarl, her own controlled, fluid response, and the shocked faces of the two girls filming. It was clinical, undeniable, and now inescapably public. A soft knock came from her open doorway. Her mother, Dr. Lena Williams, stood there, a book in her hand. "Taylor, everything all right? Your phone is making a racket." Wordlessly, Taylor handed her phone to her mother. Lena, a woman trained to observe and dissect social structures, watched the video once, her brow furrowed. She watched it a second time, her analytical mind processing the power dynamics, the body language, the setting. She looked up at her daughter, her face a mixture of concern and steely resolve. "Her name is Blakely Covington," Taylor stated quietly, her voice even. "She was waiting for Simone Jones. She thought I was her." Lena's expression hardened. She knew all about the torment Simone had been enduring. "I see," she said. "You handled yourself appropriately, but I suspect this is only the beginning." Just then, David Williams appeared in the doorway, drawn by the unusual silence. A large, powerfully built man, his presence was calming, not intimidating. He saw the look on his wife's face in the video playing on the phone. "What's this?" Lena handed him the phone. As he watched, his face, normally open and warm, settled into the stoic mask he had worn for 20 years in the Army. He watched it twice, then looked at Taylor. "Did she say anything before this?" "Yes," Taylor replied. She took out her phone, the one she had used for the recording, and pressed play. The small speaker filled the quiet room with the tinny, venomous sound of Blakely's voice. "You're a diversity quota, a charity case my father's taxes are paying for." Followed by the snarled, "You are nothing." When the audio finished, the silence in the room was heavy, dense, with unspoken anger. David took a slow, deep breath, the soldier assessing a new battlefield. Lena's hand rested on Taylor's shoulder, a gesture of both comfort and solidarity. All right, David said, his voice a low, controlled rumble that held no room for argument. Here is what happens now. This is no longer a schoolyard incident. This is an assault preceded by a hate-motivated verbal attack. He looked at his wife. Lena, you call Helen Dawson tonight. Get her up to speed. In harm. To Taylor, he said, I'll contact Principal Thompson's office first thing in the morning to schedule a meeting. You will not speak to anyone about this, not your friends, not your classmates. You did nothing wrong. You defended yourself with discipline and control. Now we let the system we have in place do its work. Across town in the sterile, art-filled mansion of Whisperwind Bluffs, the scene was one of chaos. Robert Covington was in his home office on a conference call with lawyers in London when his own phone began buzzing with texts from other wealthy Northgate parents. Annoyed, he put the call on mute and opened the first message. It was a link to the video. He watched it, his face contorting from confusion to disbelief, and finally to incandescent rage. But his fury was not directed at his daughter's obvious aggression. It was aimed squarely at the girl who had dared to lay a hand on a Covington and at the school that had allowed it to happen. He terminated his international call mid-sentence and immediately dialed the private number of Principal Thompson. Thompson, he boomed, dispensing with any pleasantry. Robert Covington, I trust you've seen the video of my daughter being viciously assaulted by one of your students. I want that girl found, I want her arrested, and I want her expelled by noon tomorrow. Is that clear? Principal Thompson, a man perpetually exhausted by the demands of his job, felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in his stomach. But this time was different. Less than an hour ago, he had received a very professional, very calm email from Dr. Lena Williams, which included a password-protected audio file. Mr. Covington, Thompson said, his voice possessing a newfound firmness, I have indeed seen the video. I've also been made privy to an audio recording of the entire encounter, including the moments leading up to the physical altercation. There was a stunned silence on Robert's end. An audio recording, that's preposterous. It's illegal. I'll leave the legal analysis to the lawyers, Mr. Covington. Thompson continued, emboldened by the evidence. What the recording makes clear is that your daughter initiated the event, used deeply disturbing and racist language, and physically grabbed a student she had mistaken for someone else. We have a meeting scheduled with the Williams family tomorrow afternoon. Given the circumstances, I strongly suggest you and your daughter attend. Robert Covington felt a jolt, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. An audio recording. This was a complication he hadn't anticipated. His lawyer's mind began to spin, but it was clouded by paternal rage. This is a fabrication, a setup. You will handle this, Thompson, or I will have your job. I will go to the superintendent, to the board, to the mayor. You'll be lucky to be a substitute teacher in a backwater town when I'm done with you. He slammed the phone down, his mind racing. He had to crush this and crush it now. The meeting the next day was a masterclass in contrast. The Williams family arrived 10 minutes early. David, in a pressed button-down shirt, sat with the immovable posture of a man who could not be intimidated. Lena, in a sharp professional blazer, placed a slim file folder on the polished conference table. Taylor sat between them, a portrait of quiet composure. 5 minutes late, Robert Covington burst into the room, dragging a sullen, red-eyed Blakely behind him. He ignored the Williams family, completely fixing his glare on Principal Thompson. Let's make this quick. Robert began, his voice dripping with arrogance. My daughter has been through a traumatic ordeal. However, in the spirit of magnanimity, Blakely has agreed to accept an apology. We'll consider the matter closed if the other girl is given a lengthy suspension for her violent and unprovoked attack. Before the principal could even respond, Lena Williams let out a soft, humorless chuckle that drew all eyes to her. Mr. Covington, she said, her voice even and academic, but with an edge of pure, unyielding steel. I am Dr. Lena Williams. This is my husband, David, and our daughter, Taylor. We are not here to discuss an apology from my daughter. With deliberate calm, she opened her folder. First, she slid a printed transcript of the audio recording across the table to him. We are here to discuss a documented pattern of targeted racist harassment by your daughter against another student, Simone Jones, which culminated in a premeditated physical assault on my daughter. Next, she slid over a second document. This is a copy of the formal complaint we have filed with the school district. It alleges gross negligence on the part of this institution for fostering a hostile educational environment, one in which your daughter was allowed to operate without consequence for years. Finally, she placed a small, crisp business card on top of the other papers. And this, she concluded, her eyes locking onto Robert's, is the card of our attorney Helen Dawson. I believe you know her by reputation. She will be in touch with you shortly regarding the civil suit we are filing against you, your wife and your daughter for assault battery and the intentional infliction of emotional distress. Robert Covington stared at the pile of paper on the table. The transcript, the complaint, the lawyer's name. It was a legal checkmate. His face, moments before flushed with arrogant fury, turned a pale mottled gray. He looked from Lena's intelligent, unyielding gaze to David's granite-like calm, and then to Taylor, who met his stare without a flicker of fear. He finally truly understood. He had come expecting to swat away a fly. He had walked into a steel trap. The consequences for Blakely Covington arrived not like a tidal wave, but like a slow, crushing avalanche. The indefinite suspension was the first stone. The principal's office delivered the news over the phone to her father, a cold formality that signaled the school was no longer susceptible to his influence. For Blakely, locked in her room, the initial fury soon curdled into a bewildering sense of disbelief. This wasn't how her world worked. Problems were meant to be erased by her father's checkbook and a few sharp phone calls. Her phone, once a source of power and social affirmation, became an instrument of torture. She scrolled through feeds that were a digital bonfire of her own reputation. The video of the bridge incident was everywhere, remixed into merciless memes. One superimposed her onto a trampoline. Another set her undignified flight to classical music. Worse than the anonymous trolls were the messages from her own classmates. The group chat she had once ruled was now renamed the Northgate Bridge Club, and it was filled with mocking commentary and screenshots of her former glory. The deepest cut came from Heather and Jessica. In an interview with Ben Carter for the school paper, anonymously of course, but Blakely knew their voices, they painted themselves as frightened bystanders. "We were honestly just scared of her," Heather's quote read. "The things she would say about people, about Simone. It was horrible. We only filmed because we were afraid of what she'd do if we didn't." Betrayal, sharp and venomous, coiled in Blakely's gut. They had laughed at every joke. They had been her eager audience. Now they were virtuous whistleblowers. The isolation was absolute, a suffocating silence in the vast cold rooms of her home. Powerless, for the first time in her life, she was forced to marinate in her own humiliation, a feeling so foreign and agonizing, it left no room for remorse, only for a festering, misdirected rage. In her mind, the architect of this misery wasn't the girl who had thrown her, but the girl she had meant to attack. It was all Simone Jones's fault. If that quiet, talentless charity case had never come to Northgate, her life would still be perfect. While his daughter stewed, Robert Covington went to war. He refused to see the situation as a mess to be cleaned up. He saw it as an insurrection to be crushed. His first move was to engage a high-priced crisis PR firm from the city specialists in reputational management. In their sleek glass office, Robert laid out his demands. "I want you to paint this Taylor Williams girl as a violent delinquent." He ordered, his voice sharp with command. "Find dirt, a fight she got into, a detention she served. Anything. We brand her as the aggressor, a threat to other students. My daughter was terrified and defending herself." The PR agents, men in tailored suits who trafficked in manufactured narratives, assured him it would be handled. They launched a whispered campaign, seeding anonymous comments on news articles and trying to plant stories with friendly bloggers. But the effort was a spectacular failure. Taylor Williams's record was a fortress of excellence. Perfect grades, glowing teacher recommendations, zero disciplinary infractions. The planted stories were so transparently false that they were publicly ridiculed, and screenshots of the clumsy attempts were sent to Ben Carter, adding fuel to the narrative that the Covingtons were vindictive bullies. The campaign only succeeded in making Taylor look even more untouchable and the Covingtons more desperate. Undeterred, Robert escalated. He made a direct call to the district attorney, Frank Miller, a man whose political campaigns had been generously funded by Covington's firm. "Frank, it's Rob Covington." He began, the false warmth in his voice barely masking the steel beneath. About this Northgate incident, I expect your office to be filing assault charges against Taylor Williams immediately. This is a clear-cut case of violent assault on a minor. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The DA, a shrewd political operator, could smell a disaster. Rob, he said, his tone cautious, I've reviewed the file, the full file. We have a video that shows your daughter initiating physical contact. We have an audio recording which I'm told is crystal clear of your daughter uttering threats and racially motivated hate speech. Frankly, if any charges are to be filed here, they won't be against Ms. Williams. Don't be ridiculous, Frank. That audio is inadmissible. Robert roared, his composure cracking. Maybe in a criminal trial, maybe not. But the political trial is another matter. The DA countered, his voice losing its warmth. My advice to you as a friend is to stop digging. You're going to hit something you can't get out of. The click of the phone ending the call was like a gunshot in the silent room. For the first time, a thread of genuine fear wove through Robert's anger. His influence was failing. While Robert was fighting a losing war on multiple fronts, Helen Dawson was conducting a masterclass in legal strategy. The civil complaint she filed was a work of art. It didn't just target Blakely. It named Robert and his wife as co-defendants, building a devastating case for negligent parental supervision. It cited Robert's profession as a lawyer, arguing he possessed a heightened awareness of the consequences of such behavior, and alleged that the family's wealth and social standing had created an environment where Blakely believed she was immune to consequence. It was designed to pierce the corporate veil of the family itself. The deposition of Simone Jones was the turning point. It took place in a sterile conference room, the long table separating the parties. Simone arrived with her grandmother looking small and fragile, but Taylor Williams was with them, offering a quiet nod of solidarity. Helen Dawson's presence was a calming force. Initially, Simone's voice was barely a whisper as the Covington's lawyer began his questioning, but Helen guided her expertly. Simone, she said gently during a break, you don't have to be a lawyer. Just tell your story. The truth is, you're shielded. When the deposition resumed, something had shifted. Simone sat up straighter. She looked the opposing counsel in the eye. At Helen's prompting, she produced the worn spiral notebook she had used as a diary. Could you please read the entry dated October 12th? Helen asked. Simone's voice, though soft, was clear and steady as she read into the official record. Cafeteria line today. B called my braids ghetto, loud enough for everyone to hear. Said I was probably living off her father's tax dollars. Jessica and Heather laughed. I felt so small, like I was invisible, and a giant target at the same time. I just wanted to disappear. She read another entry and another. Each one was a small, sharp cut, meticulously documented. The spilled tray, the lost art project, the constant venomous whispers. The cumulative effect in the silent room was devastating. It was no longer about a single event on a bridge. It was about a sustained, soul-crushing campaign of psychological torture. The deposition transcript was leaked to the press. The story went from a local curiosity to a national headline. The Covington name was now irrevocably linked with racist bullying. The shockwaves hit Robert's firm Covington, Graves & Finch with the force of a tsunami. The first call was from the city manager, informing them their lucrative contract as counsel for the city's pension fund was under review due to ethical concerns. That was the final straw for the other named partners. They summoned Robert to the main boardroom. The mood was glacial. Rob, this has to stop. Mr. Graves began, his usual placid demeanor gone. We're hemorrhaging credibility. The firm's name, our names are being dragged through the mud. This is a private family matter. Robert retorted, his face flushed. The hell it is! Mr. Finch slammed his hand on the table. We just lost the pension fund. The pension fund. Do you know how long it took to get that account? Your daughter's temper tantrum and your arrogant attempts to cover it up are costing us millions and decades of goodwill. You brought a knife to a gunfight you started, and now you're shooting the rest of us in the foot. The professional humiliation was mirrored by a collapse at home. His wife, who had weathered years of his arrogance in exchange for a life of quiet luxury, was cracking under the social ostracism. Her friends wouldn't return her calls. She was asked to step down from the board of her favorite charity. One evening, she confronted him in their cavernous living room, her face pale and her voice trembling, with a rage he had never seen. "You have to end this, Robert. Pay them whatever they want. Make it go away. It's the principle of the thing," he roared, pacing the marble floor. "They are trying to destroy us." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "No," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut him deeper than any shout. "Blakely did this, and you taught her how." The accusation hung in the air, an undeniable truth that shattered the last of his self-delusions. As the Covington empire crumbled from within, Ben Carter sat at his desk, feeling the story was reaching its conclusion. But his journalistic instincts told him something was missing. The Covington's arrogance felt too practiced, too confident. That night, an anonymous, encrypted email appeared in his inbox. It contained no greeting and no signature, just a single chilling line of text. "You're only scratching the surface. Look up Paulina Rodriguez Northgate 2021. Some ghosts don't stay buried." Ben Carter, the young journalist from the Northgate digital paper, was fueled by a potent combination of ambition and righteous indignation. The anonymous tip, Paulina Rodriguez 2021, was a loose thread, and he was determined to pull it no matter what unraveled. His initial searches were frustrating. School records were a brick wall. Paulina Rodriguez had transferred, citing family reasons, a bureaucratic dead end. Official channels were closed. He changed his tactics, turning to the school's social undercurrents. He spent hours scrolling through old social media posts from 2021, searching for Paulina's name for any whispers or clues. He found ghost-tagged photos, where Paulina was now untagged, old comments on the debate team's page that spoke of her talent before she vanished. It was the digital footprint of a deliberate erasure. His breakthrough came after he discreetly reached out to 3 former teachers who had left Northgate around that time. 2 didn't respond. The third, a former guidance counselor named Mrs. Albright, initially rebuffed him with a panicked email. But Ben sensed her fear was laced with guilt. He wrote back a single compassionate line: "Her story deserves to be heard. Hiding it only lets it happen again." That was the key. 2 days later, a choked voice on the phone asked to meet him at a small coffee shop in the next town over. Mrs. Albright was a nervous woman who clutched her cup with trembling hands, her eyes darting toward the door. In hushed, pained tones, she laid out the whole sordid affair. Paulina Rodriguez, a brilliant and fiery debater from a working-class family, had become Blakely's obsession. The harassment was constant, but it reached its apex before the state qualifying tournament. Blakely and 2 others cornered her in the girls' locker room. Mrs. Albright whispered, tears welling in her eyes. They didn't just taunt her. They destroyed her debate case, ripped up months of research. They took scissors to her team blazer while she was forced to watch. They broke her spirit, and they did it for sport. Paulina's parents had been furious. They had come to the school threatening a lawsuit, but they were intimidated, outmatched. Then Robert Covington got involved. Mrs. Albright continued, her voice filled with shame. He didn't mediate. He dominated. He met with the family privately. A week later, they were gone. A check was written, a non-disclosure agreement was signed, and Paulina Rodriguez ceased to exist at Northgate. "I quit at the end of that year. I couldn't be a part of a system that protects the predator and silences the victim." Ben recorded every word. He knew he was holding a bomb. He immediately delivered his findings to Helen Dawson. The civil rights attorney listened to the recording in her office, her face impassive but a cold fire burning in her eyes. This was the linchpin. It wasn't just a single incident on a bridge anymore. It was a documented pattern of predatory behavior, aided and abetted by a father who used his fortune as a weapon to purchase silence. The case had transformed. "Mr. Carter," she said, switching off the recorder, "you have done this community a great service." Her next move was swift and lethal. She didn't just threaten to use the information. She filed a formal motion to compel a legal document that landed on the desk of Robert Covington's high-priced lawyer like a declaration of war. It demanded the full unredacted settlement agreement with the Rodriguez family, citing its direct relevance in establishing a pattern of malicious conduct and witness tampering through financial inducement. The reaction in the Covington camp was one of pure panic. Robert's lawyer, a man whose strategy had been built on bluster and delay, explained the catastrophic reality. The motion would almost certainly be granted by a judge. The NDA would be pierced. The story of Paulina Rodriguez would become public record, not just in the press, but in a court of law. It would be irrefutable proof that Robert knew of his daughter's capacity for calculated cruelty and had actively concealed it. The State Bar Association's Ethics Committee would launch an investigation. Disbarment wasn't a risk, it was a near certainty. The fight drained from Robert Covington's body, replaced by the icy dread of total ruin. The shark was cornered, bleeding and out of the fight. He called Helen Dawson's office. He was ready to surrender. The settlement conference was staged in the neutral territory of Helen Dawson's boardroom, a space of polished mahogany and muted tones that seemed to absorb all sound. The atmosphere was thick with tension. On one side sat the Williams family, David, an unmovable mountain of quiet dignity, Lena, her analytical gaze missing nothing, and Taylor, her posture poised and calm. Beside them sat Simone Jones and her grandmother, no longer looking like victims, but like survivors demanding an accounting. On the other side sat Robert Covington, a ghost in a bespoke suit, his face sallow and lined with sleepless nights. Beside him, Blakely was a shrunken figure, her designer clothes hanging on her as if on a stranger. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, numb terror. She couldn't bring herself to look across the table. Helen Dawson began, her voice cool and measured. The terms she stated were not a negotiation. They were the price of justice. First, the finances. This was never about money, she clarified, looking directly at Robert. It is, however, about removing the tool you have used to inflict and conceal harm. The settlement was broken down with clinical precision, a sum that would cover in full the university education of both Simone Jones and Taylor Williams at any institution of their choosing. A separate, substantial trust fund for Simone to provide a lifetime of security and independence. A large mandatory donation to the National Bullying Prevention Center. And finally, full financial restitution to the Rodriguez family, voiding their NDA and tripling their original settlement amount as damages for their forced silence. To meet the obligation, Robert would have to liquidate vast personal assets, effectively gutting his fortune. Second, the public reckoning. Shame is a powerful disinfectant, Dawson stated, sliding a document across the table. Blakely will write a full and formal letter of apology. It will be printed on the front page of the local newspaper's Sunday edition and remain on the district website's homepage for 1 year. She tapped a highlighted paragraph. The letter will explicitly name both Simone Jones and Taylor Williams. It will admit to a campaign of racist harassment against Simone. It will admit to initiating a physical assault against Taylor. It will contain the words, "I was wrong," without qualification or excuse. Finally, Lena Williams leaned forward to deliver the last condition herself. Mr. Covington, my field of study is sociology. I've spent my life studying the structures that create behaviors like your daughter's. She began, her voice calm, yet devastatingly direct. Punishment without understanding is useless. Therefore, Blakely will not be allowed to retreat into the world of expensive private tutors. She laid out the terms of Blakely's new reality. Her expulsion from Northgate was permanent. She would be enrolled at East End Public, the underfunded school on the other side of the county, and she would complete 500 hours of community service at the East End Community Center. She will not be filing papers in a back office, Lena specified, her eyes locking with Blakely's for the first time. She will serve meals in the soup kitchen. She will scrub the floors. She will tutor children whose lives you cannot begin to imagine. You will be forced to confront the humanity of the people you and your family have taught yourself to look down upon. It is the only path to any kind of meaningful redemption. Every word was a nail in the coffin of the Covington's life. Robert stared at the signature page, the pen in his hand trembling. He looked at his daughter, her face a blank mask of shock. With a final shuddering breath, he signed his name, the ink, a dark scar on the page. The fallout was immediate and absolute. The Covington empire crumbled. Facing disbarment in a mass exodus of clients, Robert was forced out of the firm his grandfather founded. It was rebranded Graves, Finch and Associates within 3 months. His wife, unable to bear the public disgrace and private toxicity, filed for divorce and disappeared from his life. Blakely's sentence began. Her first day at East End High was a lesson in anonymity. She was a ghost, her status and name meaningless. Her first shift at the community center was a crucible of humiliation. As she awkwardly served a plate of stew to a little boy, he simply looked up at her and said, "Thank you," with a smile that held no judgment, no knowledge of her past. The simple kindness confused her more than any insult could have. Slowly, painfully, through hundreds of hours of mundane, difficult and humbling work, the layers of her indoctrinated hatred began to peel away. In the world beyond the Covingtons' collapse, life moved forward. Simone Jones, free and unburdened, thrived. Her art took on a new bold confidence, and she became a leader and a mentor to younger students. The settlement gave her freedom, but her own strength gave her a future. She and Taylor forged a deep and genuine friendship, often spending afternoons sketching together their conversations easy and full of laughter. Taylor Williams remained herself. She gracefully deflected all media requests her actions on the bridge never intended for an audience. She had done what was necessary, and that was enough. She graduated as Northgate's valedictorian. As she stood at the podium, the auditorium was silent. She looked out at the faces at her proud parents, at Simone, who gave her a thumbs up, and she began her speech not with a story of a fight, but with a principle of science. Isaac Newton's third law of motion states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. She said, her voice clear and steady. This isn't just a law of physics. It is a fundamental truth of human interaction. The energy we project, be it kindness or cruelty, arrogance or empathy, creates a force that will inevitably return to us. It is the universe's most elegant and inescapable form of karma. The challenge isn't to avoid the reaction, but to be the kind of person who can stand firmly and meet it, whatever it may be, with integrity, grace, and strength. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a bully getting what she deserved. It was a story about different kinds of strength. The toxic, fragile strength of privilege versus the deep, quiet strength of character. It shows that true power doesn't come from a famous last name or a trust fund, but from disciplined intelligence and the courage to stand up not just for yourself, but for others. The consequences for the Covington family were not supernatural karma. They were the direct, real-world result of their own actions, a debt of cruelty that finally came due. If this story of karmic justice and quiet resilience resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that bullies don't always win. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more real-life stories to share where the entitled get their comeuppance and true strength wins the day. Thank you for listening.